And by doing so, I in no way mean to discredit or to downplay the bias that is faced by people who do not identify by those terms, or to the number of other populations that experience discrimination on a daily basis. I want to acknowledge my own privilege standing here today as a straight white woman, and as James Maskalick so eloquently wrote, no matter how I might try, I can't even tell what walls I'm missing. I ask that today you, as I present, you try and maintain an open mind. This talk, the goal is to shed the light on the fact that gender bias is still alive and well in the workplace, and we need to be educated on how it affects us and those around us every single day. And I want you to take that kind of gut, visceral reaction you get when you hear gender bias and suppress it, at least for the next 20 or so minutes. And then if we have time at the end, we can maybe unpack that in questions. And I want to make one thing very, very clear. This is not a men issue. Women and men perpetuate these biases every day. So this is not an issue with men. This is an issue with all of us and all of our bias. So I'm going to do things a little bit backwards just for this one. I'm going to start with the boring stuff, sorry Alan, and get that out of the way. And then I'm going to jump right into why we believe this is so important. So female leadership in paramedicine, also affectionately referred to as FLIP. Myself, Megan Slack, Chelsea Gold, another Fanshawe grad, and Alan Batter undertaking this research. And our main goal is to identify actual, perceived, and potential barriers to female leadership in paramedicine. Since there currently is no research into the experiences of female leaders within paramedicine in Ontario anyway, we have to draw parallels from other industries such as business, tech, academic medicine, in order to see why this may be the case. In this study, we're going to be looking at leaders from several different sectors. So from the paramedic services, we'll be looking at chief positions, deputy chief, superintendent or supervisor roles. And then within base hospitals, we'll be looking at directors or managers, and then pre-hospital care specialists or clinical educators, whatever term that program uses. And then within the paramedic programs within colleges, we're going to be looking at the coordinator role, full-time faculty, as well as part-time faculty. We want to get as broad of a view of leadership as possible, so that's why we want to include as many leaders as we can. And currently, just to give you an idea, within paramedicine in Ontario, there's publicly available information about the current leaders. So at the paramedic services level, the highest level of leadership being the chief, there are 52 paramedic services within Ontario, and 5 of those have female chiefs. Within base hospital programs, there are 8 base hospital programs in total. 5 of those have female managers and directors. Within 27 primary care paramedic programs, there are 12 female coordinators, and within 11 advanced care paramedic programs, there are 2 female coordinators. So right now, I just want you to maybe keep in mind the immediate reasons that might come to your head of why you think that there are no, or not there are none, but there are fewer female leaders at the highest leadership positions. As I said before, with no research currently on this topic in Ontario, we have to draw parallels. So jumping right into sponsorship and mentorship. Not all mentorship relationships are created equal. So classic mentoring styles may include career advice, psychosocial support, and typically one or the other. If it includes both of those support systems, it's typically found from a variety of different mentors that the mentee may find. Whereas sponsors, they go above and beyond. They take a very active role in the sponsoring of their trainee. They actively advocate for the career progression of their trainee. And one study's found that men are much more likely to have this sponsorship relationship versus mentorship relationship, and that those with sponsoring are much more content and happy with the rate of their career advancement. And often we find that these types of sponsoring and mentorship relationships form between those who have common similarities. So senior leaders may gravitate towards someone that reminds them of themselves. And what happens when there are more men in these leadership positions is they gravitate towards junior men. So we need to be aware of that, and we need our senior men to jump in and mentor and sponsor junior women. Oh, self-reflection. You will never escape it. I'm not asking you to self-reflect today, although that would not be a bad idea. I want to talk more about self-reflection and how it may not be equal to our performance and success. So multiple studies from multiple industries have shown that when women self-reflect, they tend to give themselves lower scores than men do, and lower than evaluators actually rate their performance. In assessments of students actually in a surgery rotation, they found that when compared with self-evaluations and faculty evaluations, women were rating themselves with lower scores when they were actually outperforming the men based on faculty evaluations. So when they looked at the self-assessments, women were giving themselves lower scores, men were giving themselves higher scores, and then faculty evaluations showed that women were actually outperforming the men. In a study of over 1,000 potential political candidates, they found that men were about 60% more likely to believe that they were very qualified to run for political office. And in a survey of over 1,000 Harvard Law students, in qualities that were specifically related to practicing law, women gave themselves lower scores on almost every single category. So we need to continuously reevaluate and recognize that self-evaluation does not equal performance when it comes to this. With the discrepancy in the self-evaluation, I want you to just listen to this next study. So Hewlett-Packard, they did an internal report, and they were looking at when people apply for jobs, and they found that women, they were only applying for jobs that they felt that they met 100% of the criteria for. On the other hand, men were applying to these positions when they felt that they met 60% of the criteria. So this is not a knock at men saying that they're applying for positions that they're not qualified for. This is saying when you look at the self-evaluation of women and it's not actually predictive of performance, but these women are only applying to positions that they feel they meet 100% of the criteria for, are they not reaching for these goals? Are they not reaching for these promotions? And is that the only thing that is causing fewer women to be in leadership positions, or is there inherent bias that affects the hiring as well? In something black and white, such as music, I would maybe naively assume that whoever played the best music would get the job, whoever sounded the best would be hired. And they found that was really not the case. So in the 1970s, the top symphony orchestras in America found that fewer than 5% of their musicians were female. And from there, they actually instituted a blind hiring process. So musicians were behind screens, the evaluators couldn't hear them speak, they couldn't hear them walking in. All they could hear was the music that they were playing, and they were evaluated based on skill, and I think everyone sees where this is going. This resulted in approximately 30% increase in the hiring of females. And it's just important to remember, gender bias is influencing our assessment of women and men every single day, and it typically raises our assessment of men while lowering our assessment of women. Although this data doesn't exist in paramedicine, I don't think it's a stretch to say that there is a chance that these biases are playing a role, and that's why we need to do research. We need to determine if there are actual barriers and if there are perceived barriers and where the gender climate exists for females. So when we talk about success and likability for women, I'm going to talk about two of my favorite pals, Heidi and Howard. I'm not sure if anyone has heard this study before, but it's actually a Harvard business case review, and 50% of a class was assigned to read a study about Heidi, the case about Heidi. She's a successful venture capitalist. 50% of the class was assigned to read the exact same case, exact same credentials, literally the exact same to the letter, but the name was changed to Howard. After students read this, they were polled. They said, hey, what do you think of my friend Howard here? And everyone said, the percentage of the class that read Howard's study, they said, oh, great guy, great leader. And then they said, oh, what do you think of Heidi? They said, ice queen, manipulative, calculative. These weren't the exact words. They didn't use ice queen, but they found that Heidi was someone that they would less like to work for. They found that Howard was a better leader. He was assertive, he was confident, he was someone that people would want to have them lead. This is the exact same person. The only thing changed is the name. They were found to be equally competent, which is great because they are the exact same person. But when it came down to it, Heidi was unlikable as a leader. And these multiple studies have replicated this. This was replicated in a class of residents as well. So when it comes down to a debate between success and likability, we need to think of Heidi. When it comes down to performance reviews, when people say, well, she's competent at her job, but she's just not as well liked by her peers. We need to think, are they paying a gender penalty in this case? Women and men perpetuate this bias. It's not different between women and men. If the hiring committee was the same, and they still found these results. So a very similar study looked at the hiring of a potential police chief. So they had the same thing. They had two identical resumes. The only thing that was different was one was a male and one was a female. The names were changed. What they found was that the hiring committee was actually redefining the criteria that they felt was absolutely necessary for the job to fit the male candidate. So in the exact same resume, what was on it was, so this is for the job of a potential police chief, and there was a strong educational record and a weaker service record, so a weaker number of arrests within the service. And they found that the group looking at the male's resume, when they looked at the strong educational record, they said, that's awesome. That is exactly what we want from someone. This is absolutely necessary for the job of a police chief. They then looked at the weaker service record and they said, oh, that's not as big of a deal here. We can let that slide. When they were looking at the women's resume, when they saw that she had a weaker service record, they said, that's something that we really need to have for the job of a police chief, and she just doesn't have that. She has a strong educational record, but we just don't feel that that's as important for this job. So this is termed as merit manipulation, which actually enables people to discriminate based on gender or based on bias, and then they feel good about it. They feel that they're being objective. They don't notice their bias here. So evaluators were actually polled on how objective they felt they were being, with simple questions like, do you base your decisions on logic, do you feel you choose right over wrong? And the people that felt that they were more objective actually showed that they had more gender bias in this study. So I think prejudice often expresses itself in a way that people can make themselves feel like they're being objective about it, but it's an unconscious process, and that's why we need to be aware that this happens. Moving forward with that, I think most people can agree bias exists, but in other people. It's not in me, it's not in you guys, we're all well-educated people. Can exist for us, it's only in others. And in a study of students at Stanford, they found that they actually had the students poll themselves how susceptible they were compared to the average American on a variety of biases. And overwhelmingly, people stated that they were less susceptible to these biases than others. This has been replicated in other schools, within the business world, and within airport travelers versus other airport travelers in the same day. And overwhelmingly, people say the same thing, that they are less susceptible to bias, which people tend to view themselves in a positive light, and their actions and their outcomes in a positive light, and there's absolutely nothing wrong with that, but it becomes an issue when you become overconfident in your powers of objectivity, and then you fail to correct for those biases. That's really important, that we're continuously self-evaluating, and then even recognizing that no matter how objective we feel we may be being, that there could be a blind spot. So I'm gonna bring it back here to why, think of the reasons why you initially thought that there might be fewer females in paramedicine. A lot of the time, the simple excuse of, well, there weren't as many females in the job 30 years ago that would now possess those capabilities to take on that high leadership position. But is it possible that other things are going on, that these gender biases, these unconscious biases are affecting our hiring process and our promotion and our retention of these women? And that's really what we want to look at, right? We want to gain insight and understanding into the effects of the perceived climate that these female leaders feel they've overcome. Did they feel there were barriers? What do they feel is the current climate for female leaders in paramedicine? So what can be done? We have to be open, we have to mentor, we have to sponsor, we have to talk openly, we have to continuously reevaluate whether women and men are being judged by a different standard in your organization. And then organizationally, it has to come on all different dimensions. It has to be recruitment, it has to be promotion, hiring. If you're finding that there are no qualified women for leadership positions, then there needs to be programs put in place that make sure that the leadership is representative of the population that they serve. So I think Heidi says it in a really good way, that it's not just about putting these programs into place to increase the number of women. If the climate is poor, then no, you won't retain this talent. And that's true for everyone, but we need to make sure that we're evaluating the climate for current leaders and we're making it count, not just counting how many leaders are at the top. And that's where I'll bring it back to our study, is there's still a lot of data collection to be done. That's why I can't really talk about the results today. But we're really excited to be facing this head on, and the most important thing is that it's not one person's job to change this. It's not one conversation to be had. If you learned anything today, I want you to take that out and tell two people. Tell one male and tell one female something that you learned today, something that surprised you, because this is a change that needs to happen from all of us. It's not just one person. All right, I'll open it up to questions.
All right, so Brittany, PCP student. I'm just interested to know, in these studies on the merit manipulation and likability, were the evaluators a mix of both males and females, and did that change their responses at all?
They were an equal mix of male and female in both categories. So where they split it between 50% of the class would read Heidi, 50% of the class would read Howard, they were actually equally split male and female, and they all demonstrated these biases.
Sorry, Mike, PCP student, I just want to add to that. Does that include the, I was going to ask the same question, but for the police chief hiring position, the committee, was that split as well?
Exactly, yes, it was split completely 50-50. That's why I really wanted to start at the beginning by saying this is not a men issue. Women and men are perpetuating these biases.
Thank you.
Paige, this is fantastic work. I'm really excited. Really excited. Big fan, absolutely. I actually don't have a question. I just wanted to sing your praises and how fantastic this initiative is.
Thanks very much.
And thank you for doing a lot of the legwork with the differences of just exposing gender bias, because it's everywhere and it's nowhere all at once. And also thank you so much for pointing out the differences between representation and influence. A lot of people say, oh, well, you know, there's just as many female paramedics as male paramedics, so, you know, what are you complaining about? And what they don't realize, and what you so very eloquently pointed out, is that that's actually not the case for women in positions of influence. So representation in employment versus influence are two completely different issues, so thank you for pointing that out.
Thanks very much. And I would also like to say that although we looked at the highest levels of leadership, that's where we want to say lower levels of management as well. We want to look at, that stagnation is still occurring there, so that's why we want to look at all levels of leadership, not just the highest.
Up there.
Hi, PCB student, first year. I just had a question because you were saying there's a lower level of management, or high level management and low level management. Do you think, or have you looked into, does that affect the number of female paramedics in those services where there is someone in leadership that is female? So is there a higher rate of females being hired at those services where there is someone in charge that represents that gender?
So I just want to clarify, you mean if there is a female chief?
Yeah, so if there's a female chief or someone in the hiring committee, is that services representation more equal than the other services where there is no representation?
So we're looking at all variables right there. So we will have that information. We're going to look at the number of females that are employed in the workforce in general as paramedics, and then we're going to look at lower level management, upper level management, and that's a really great point to see where, if that is creating more opportunity for females. But as I said before, the hiring committees that were both 50-50, female and male, were still showing these gender biases when it came to the hiring process. So. All right, thanks for your time. Thought I was in the clear.
When are you going to present your results to the fire department?
They're actually leading the way. Pardon? In trying to change, yeah, when you look at like systematic ways of trying to change hiring processes and stuff, they're more progressive than we are at this point in time, whether it's good progress or bad progress or things that Paige is saying, like the retention of people. They're starting to try and make sure that more women are at least being hired at the ground level. So.
And
The only reason I asked that question is because I got a chance to meet this guy named Glenn Asada. He's the medical director for the city of New York for the fire department. And he says, well, how many females do you think work? So we have 11,000 firefighters working in the city of New York. How many do you think are female? So I'll just ask anybody.
7.
How many?
7.
7% or 7 total?
7 total.
7 total? Well, you're close. When I talked to him, they had 24 out of 11,000 firefighters. He was very proud of the fact that they just hired another 24, so they doubled their number. Take that as you will, but that's the only reason that prompted the question.
I think one thing I didn't mention, because there's really no research to support it, but I think what possibly may be an issue as well is when merit manipulation can occur when hiring committees already have a candidate in mind and the person is handpicked. And that bias occurs for everyone in that competition. Anecdotally, I know that could be something that is occurring as well. So we need more research. We need to put in the legwork to determine what is actually happening.
I just have a quick question here. Zach, PCP student as well. I guess it's not so much a question as a kind of an appreciation as well. My mother's a firefighter in Kitchener, and she has been for the last 20, don't quote me on that, 20 plus years. But I think they have over 200 firefighters there, and there's under 10 female firefighters currently working in Kitchener. So it's more local than New York, like it's happening. But again, it's a culture, right? That's the difficulty of gender bias, is it is a culture change that's difficult. So I just wanted to say thank you.
Thank you.
So I'd like to introduce the next student research group.